The case we're going to talk about today is tragic beyond words. The fact that it took place overnight on Christmas Eve makes it all the more heartbreaking. As a parent, what is the worst thing that you can imagine happening? The death of your child, of course. How about losing 5 of your children at the same time? That is the tragedy this couple faced in 1945. But were they lost in the fire, or was it something more sinister? Let's talk about the Sodder children. George and Jenny Sodder were Italian immigrants who were living in Fayetteville, West Virginia. George had his own trucking company where he hauled coal. Jenny stayed at home and cared for the couple's children. There were 9 of them still at home, ranging from age 3 to 23, and a 10th child, a son Joe, who was currently away in the military. Their Christmas Eve in 1945 started out as pleasant and ordinary. However, after the Sodders went to bed that Christmas Eve, nothing would ever be the same again. According to Jenny Sodder, that night the younger children opened some toys that their older sister Marion had purchased for them from the dime store where she worked. They wanted to stay up and play with them past their usual bedtime. Being as it was a special occasion, their parents agreed. George and Jenny went to bed around 10:30 p.m. along with the youngest child, Sylvie, and reminded Maurice and Louis to put the cows in and feed the chickens before they went to bed. Normally, Marion would put the younger children, Martha Lee, Jenny, and Betty, to bed, but this night she fell asleep on the couch before she was able to. John and George Jr. said they went upstairs to their bedroom between 11:15 and 11:30 p.m., but weren't sure if the younger kids were asleep. Then around 12:30 a.m., Jenny Sodder was awakened by the phone ringing. She got up and answered the call, and a woman on the other line asked for an individual whom Jenny didn't know. She also heard laughter in the background. She informed the caller she had the wrong number and hung the phone up. She noticed briefly that the lights in the living room were on, her daughter Marion was asleep on the couch, and the front door was unlocked. She assumed her other children had went back to their rooms. She then closed the curtains, turned the lights off, locked the door, and went back to bed. But her sleep would soon be interrupted again. Around 1 a.m., breaking the quiet of Christmas Eve, Jenny heard what she described as a thud and a rolling sound on the roof of the house. Explaining away what she thought she heard as a dream, she went back to sleep. About 30 minutes after that, she was awakened by the smell of smoke in the house. She jumped out of bed, grabbed her 3-year-old daughter Sylvie from her nearby crib, woke up her husband George, and exited the house. As they are fleeing, they yell for all the children to get out, and eventually Marion, John, and George Jr. all ran from the 2-story house, which was now engulfed. The family then waited for the other 5 children to come out of the house, but no one else ever emerged from the flames. Try to imagine the sheer terror that the Sodders were faced with while watching their house burn to the ground, with 5 of their children still unaccounted for. George was in an absolute panic trying to rescue his remaining children from their upstairs rooms. He smashed a downstairs window with his hand, which caused it to start bleeding heavily, but he didn't even notice. When the smoke and flames were too intense to enter that way, he went looking for the ladder that he always kept propped up against the house to access the upstairs bedrooms, but it was missing. He then tried to scoop some water out of a nearby rain barrel to put out the fire, only to find it was frozen. Then he had an idea. He would drive his truck up to the window so he could climb up to the 2nd story to rescue his children. His truck, that worked fine the day before, now inexplicably wouldn't start. George didn't know what else to do. His arm was now bleeding profusely and his voice hoarse from screaming for his children. The flames were now so fierce there was little George and Jenny Sodder, along with the 4 other children that had escaped, could do but to watch it burn. Jenny said she continued to watch the upstairs bedroom windows but never saw her children's face in them as she had expected. It only took about 45 minutes of burning for the Sodder house to completely collapse from the fire. Unaccounted for after the fire were 5 of the Sodder children: Maurice 14, Martha Lee 12, Louis 9, Jenny 8, and Betty 5. The Sodders had initially tried to phone the fire department when they were alerted to the fire, but discovered their phone wasn't working. Then neighbors had tried to phone for help as soon as they learned about the blaze, but there was no answer. A passerby drove into town to find the fire chief and alert him. There was reportedly no siren at the firehouse, so the volunteer firefighters had to be alerted one by one via a phone tree. Although they were first made aware of the fire around 1 a.m., they didn't show up on scene until a shocking 7 hours later at 8 a.m. It took the firefighters so long to get to the fire that by the time they arrived, it had pretty much burned itself out. It was still smoldering when they were on scene. When it was safe for the firefighters to start searching the rubble, their main focus was to find the remains of the 5 Sodder children believed to have perished inside. What they would, or more importantly would not, find is still baffling and defies explanation 78 years later. There were no remains found in the fire, no skulls or anything recognizable as bones or human remains. Since it was Christmas Day, they did a preliminary search and told George Sodder to leave the scene alone and they would be back soon to do a more thorough search. However, he would not listen to their direction. The grieving father had initially thought his children's remains were at the scene of the fire. In his mourning, just 4 days after the fire, he bulldozed what was left of the home. He then filled the basement area with 5 feet of dirt where the house was standing just a few days prior to level it out. He intended to make it a memorial garden for his lost children. But his actions, although understandably due to grief, would make it much more difficult to conduct a thorough search for his children's remains and would prove to ultimately be a detriment to the investigation. On that same day, there was a memorial service for the 5 Sodder children thought to have perished at the site of the fire. Hundreds of mourners turned out, as well as the remaining Sodder children. However, George and Jenny Sodder did not attend their children's funeral, reportedly too devastated at the thought of their 5 children being gone. As best as they could tell, the Fayetteville Fire Department thought the fire was electrical in nature. The Sodders disputed this theory from the beginning because they said the lights were on during the fire initially. It was also thought that their phone wasn't working due to the fire, but upon closer inspection, it was revealed the phone lines had been intentionally cut. The phone lines were 14 feet from the ground, and they were cut about 2 feet from the pole, so someone would have had to use a ladder to access them. Could that be the reason the Sodders' ladder wasn't where it was usually kept? The ladder was reportedly eventually found after the fire was out in a nearby embankment. Also, concerning the thud that Jenny Sodder heard on the roof, it isn't absolutely definite, but I did see a mention in a few sources that said young daughter Sylvie found a pineapple-looking item in the yard a few months after the fire. It was thought to be a grenade, and the military did supposedly verify that it was some type of incendiary device. However, I could find no more follow-up information about the item, like if it had been set off or if it could have started the fire. A few other things that at first seemed more sinister, upon further investigation turned out to be innocent occurrences. Mrs. Frank Harding was discovered to be the one who phoned the Sodder home late that night, and it was just a wrong number. Also, concerning George Sodder's truck not starting, his comment in the fire report states in his panic to get his truck started that he must have choked it too much, thus causing it not to start. However, there were a few noteworthy and troubling things that had happened with the Sodders in the months leading up to the fire. First off, Fayetteville had a strong Italian immigrant population, and the Sodders were, for the most part, well thought of. However, George Sodder was quite outspoken in his opinion and remarks against Italian dictator Benito Mussolini and would at times exchange words with Mussolini supporters. This appeared to anger some of the Italian community, and there were a few rumblings that perhaps the fire was some sort of retaliation. There were also reports that a man who came around looking for work pointed to the fuse boxes and stated they would cause a fire someday. George Sodder didn't pay attention to this warning as he had recently just had the wiring checked by the local power company and it was pronounced safe. The older Sodder sons, as well as the mother, also recall an unknown man who would park his car near the road almost every day in the months before the tragedy and just watch the children. Jenny didn't think much of it at the time because what he does on a public road is his business. However, given the mysterious circumstances of Christmas Eve, thought it might be noteworthy after the fact. There was reportedly a theft occurring at the Sodders around the same time as the fire, possibly even connecting the two. However, in a well-researched YouTube video about the Sodders on the mysterious WV channel, it is explained quite differently. Jeff Adkins and Lonnie Johnson claimed to have went to the fire in a taxi. When they arrived, they could tell the house was too far gone to do anything about it. They then proceed to steal some block and tackle equipment from the property. It is reported that only one of the two men involved were charged that night. Lonnie Johnson pled guilty to the theft and paid a $25 fine. However, Jeff Adkins enlisted in the Army before he could be charged. It is also stated that Lonnie Johnson testified at the coroner's inquest that he was the one who had cut the phone lines with pliers. He had thought he was cutting the power lines instead. However, in a statement years later, Johnson made no mention of cutting the phone lines. There seemed to be so many unanswered questions about this incident. Was the taxi story made up and the theft planned ahead? Could Lonnie Johnson and Jeff Adkins have set the house on fire as a distraction? Were they just thieves and opportunists that figured with all the chaos going on at the scene of the blaze, it would be an easy score? If he had cut the phone lines as he admitted to initially, it would have had to have been after Jenny Sodder received the wrong number call around midnight, but before the fire started, which would put him on the scene very close to the time the fire started. I now want to talk about another theory that is often mentioned when talking about this mystery. It's about a man named Fiorenzo Giannatullo. He was a prominent Fayetteville community member whom George Sodder had worked for until they angrily parted ways just 2 years before the fire in 1943. Reports state that Giannatullo had co-signed for a $1,500 home insurance policy on the Sodder home and had recently increased it to $1,750 without the Sodders' knowledge. 2 months before the fire, through a third party, Giannatullo urged the Sodders to take out life insurance on their children. When they refused, Giannatullo reportedly became angry and threatened that their house was going up in smoke and their children were going to be destroyed. He also told George Sodder that he was going to pay for the dirty remarks he had been making about Mussolini, who had just been killed months earlier. According to the Sodders, Giannatullo was never even questioned by the authorities, seemingly due to his standing in the community. It is noteworthy that Fiorenzo Giannatullo's brother CJ was on the coroner's jury that ruled the house fire accidental. Another interesting piece of information on this topic is that Lonnie Johnson was later questioned by a PI hired by the Sodders about the theft. Johnson stated that he was getting damn tired of taking the rap for those people at Fayetteville. He later denied making that statement. Is it possible that Lonnie Johnson and Fiorenzo Giannatullo knew each other and were possibly even working together? As usual in many missing persons cases, there were reported sightings of the Sodder children in the early years after the fire. The vast majority of these ended up being false. A woman claims to have seen the children peering from a passing car while the fire was in progress. Another woman who operated a tourist spot between Fayetteville and Charleston, West Virginia, claimed she saw the children the morning after the fire and served them breakfast. A worker at a Charleston, West Virginia hotel saw the children's photos in the newspaper and claimed to have seen 4 of the 5 a week after the fire. She said they were accompanied by 2 men and 2 women, all Italian, and they all stayed in a large room with several beds. They registered at midnight, and when the worker tried to talk to the children in a friendly manner, the men appeared hostile and said something to the hotel guests in Italian, and after that they refused to continue to speak to her. There were also sightings in Cortez, Florida, and even a tip that Martha was in a convent in Texas. None of these sightings appeared to be credible, however. In 1952, in an effort to keep the story of their children alive, George Sodder purchased a billboard and put it on the site of the fire. The billboard was huge and close to the ground and featured the faces of their 5 missing children along with a reward for information. This is what the original billboard said.
What was their fate? Kidnapped? Murdered? Or are they still alive? $5,000 reward is offered by George Sodder for information leading to the recovery of any one or all 5 of his children. These children disappeared on December 24th, 1945, when their home was destroyed by fire. A complete investigation of the premises failed to provide evidence of human bones or flesh. An affidavit has been signed by a person that she saw 4 of the children in Charleston at her hotel 2 or 3 days later. They left the next day accompanied by 2 men and 2 women, although 5 different people saw the same children in Cortez, Florida.
An updated sign from 1976 reads,
After 30 years, it is not too late to investigate. On Christmas Eve 1945, our house was set afire and 5 of our children, ages 5 through 14, kidnapped. The officials blamed defective wiring, although lights were still burning after the fire started. The official report stated that the children died in the fire. However, no bones were found in the residue and there was no smell of burning flesh during or after the fire. What was the motive of the officers involved? What did they have to gain by making us suffer all these years of injustice? Why did they lie and force us to accept those lies? Picture number 6 was received in 1967. Lewis, one and the same, now in another state. Mrs. George Sodder.
It certainly did garner attention to the mystery. However, the billboard didn't appear to lead to any substantial tips in the case. The Sodders worked tirelessly over the years to try to find their children that they were now convinced had been kidnapped and had not perished in the fire. Every time there was a lead, George would travel anywhere in the country to check it out. In 1947, in an article in Look magazine, George Sodder saw a photo of some children in New York City. He was convinced one of the school children was his daughter Betty. He drove to New York to check out this potential lead, but without being able to verify any connection to the girl, he was refused the opportunity to talk with her in person. There was also talk of the children being taken by Frank Cipriani, Jenny Sodder's brother who lived in Florida, which caused the FBI to get involved briefly. The children residing with him, however, were ultimately verified to be his biological children. The parents just couldn't accept their children had perished in the fire because they were certain there would have been remains found. Jenny Sodder even did her own experiments to help bolster the theory. She would burn animal bones to see if the fire would consume them. They didn't. The bones remained intact. The Sodders also said remnants of appliances were left at the scene of the fire and were still identifiable, so surely human remains would be left as well. They spoke to a worker at a crematorium who informed them that even after bodies are burned at 2,000 degrees for 2 hours, some bones would remain. Nothing about the children completely burning up in the fire made sense to the Sodders. In 1949, 4 years after the Christmas Eve fire, a new and more thorough search was conducted at the site. A noted pathologist, Oscar B. Hunter, was brought in to oversee the dig. After an exhaustive search, there were 4 human bones found at the scene. These remains were taken to the Smithsonian Institute. They were discovered to be human remains from the lumbar vertebrae thought to belong to one person between ages 16 and 22. The oldest missing Sodder child was only 14. It didn't appear the remains had been exposed to fire as well, so it appeared to be yet another dead end. There was speculation that possibly the remains were put there accidentally when George Sodder filled in the basement shortly after the fire. Then in 1968, 23 years after the fire, there was a lead that was probably the most encouraging thus far in the Sodder search. Jenny Sodder received an envelope, reportedly not sealed, with no return address and a postmark from Central City, Kentucky. It was a picture of what very much looked like a grown-up version of Louis Sodder, who was 9 at the time of the fire. On the back of the photo, it said, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, little boys, A90132 or 35. The chilling similarity of the man's face, who resembled their little Louis, so much convinced the Sodders even more that their children were alive and out there somewhere. They even hung an enlarged version of the photo over their fireplace. The Sodders hired a PI and gave him $100 to travel to Kentucky to try to find Louis, but they never heard from the PI again. By then, George Sodder, who was in failing health but still determined to find his children, traveled with his son-in-law to Central City, Kentucky, but no one there had heard of Louis Sodder. Around that time, George Sodder was quoted as to his thoughts on his children and their search. "Time is running out for us, but we only want to know. If they did die in the fire, we want to be convinced. Otherwise, we want to know what happened to them." He would die the next year of cancer in 1969. Jenny Sodder would later say she believed all the running around searching for his children shortened George Sodder's life. Jenny Sodder continued the fight to find answers about her children. She erected a fence around her property and added rooms to her house. She also continued to dress in black, as she had done since the Christmas Eve fire, as a sign of mourning. In 1976, she decided to update the children's billboard and hired someone to paint it. She also added the picture she received in the mail that claimed to be Louis Sodder. Sadly, a few months after the sign was given new life, vandals shot at it. This did not deter Jenny Sodder, however, from searching for answers in what happened to her 5 children. Sadly, Mrs. Sodder would die in 1989 without any answers, and soon after the billboard was taken down. Her children and grandchildren continued to search for the truth of what happened that winter day in 1945. Okay. Next, I'm excited to introduce the first guest co-host on my podcast. The couple we're going to talk to also have a podcast that I am a big fan of, and I thought they would be a great choice to help dig into the mysterious case of the Sodder children. I want to welcome Leah and Scott from the Last Seen Alive podcast. Welcome, Leah and Scott.
Thanks for having us, Heather. As you know, I'm a big fan of your blog, so I've been listening to your podcast since it launched on day one.
Yeah, it's very exciting to be here and to be your first guest. I'm really honored for that.
Me too.
I appreciate that. So as I mentioned, I really enjoy your podcast. I actually first came across it when you did a podcast on the Dale Kerstetter case, and I appreciated the shout out that you gave me. Your show is very well researched and thought out, and you take these cases seriously. So let my listeners know how long you've been doing it and what made you decide to start a podcast.
It all started in the early 90s with my Robert Stack obsession with unsolved mysteries. I've been watching true crime since I was a toddler. I grew up, I'm a crime analyst now, and when I realized that true crime podcasts were a thing, I thought, hey, I could make one of these.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just had our 4-year anniversary, and we started in a cinder block basement pretty much. It's a very cheap mic, and Leah does all of the really technical hard work. Well, I mean, all of the researching hard work. I do all of the technical stuff.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, you both have careers and backgrounds that really add an additional benefit to your theorizing. And so, Leah, you said you're a crime analyst, correct?
Yep, I work at a mid-sized urban police department. I'm one of several crime analysts in our intelligence unit.
Okay. And now, Scott, has your career helped you in theorizing about these cases as well?
It really has. I'm very robust, I guess you could say. I started working with police administration in 2013, and then while I was doing that, I picked up 4 years of fire and EMS experience, and I've done security work and been working around police departments for the last decade.
Well, we're going to need your fire knowledge for sure with this case.
Definitely.
So, okay. Now, on to the Sodder children disappearance. I think the first thing I'd like to discuss is about the actual fire. I will add that we only have a few old newspaper articles to go by that sometimes contradict each other. There's also a well-researched case study from Mysterious WV that you can find on YouTube, and it's been a great resource as well. So, first, let's talk about whether we think it was likely arson or some sort of accident or faulty wiring.
I definitely think that it was most likely an act of arson.
When I think about it, I think a lot of the time comes into play a lot. I mean, winter is one of the most common times to have a house fire with everybody turning their heaters on.
Yeah.
Air ducts get clogged up. There's a lot of extra electricity going on with Christmas lights and everything else going on. So there is the possibility of it being an accident, but I love going on the theory of arson for the most part, just because it's more intriguing to me.
Yeah, I was going to say the defense by the Sodders that it couldn't be electrical in nature because they just had an electrician there doesn't really make a lot of sense. Some accounts say he was there to install a new stove, so he didn't even necessarily look at all the wiring, or perhaps he did something incorrect. Wiring in the 1940s, I'm sure, wasn't exactly the safest. But I also agree. I think it's more compelling about it being an arson because somebody was apparently there around that time. And then, of course, Jenny Sodder heard that thud and the rolling. And they even said that a few months later, one of the children found something in the yard that the army said was an incendiary device.
Yeah, I think there's both physical and circumstantial evidence that in this case suggests that there was probably foul play involved.
Yes, and I wanted to talk about Lonnie Johnson because, what a coincidence that he's there that night. So, I mean, he admitted that he cut the phone lines when he was initially charged, and he actually pled guilty to the theft. But he says that him and his friend were there in a taxi, and the fire was too far gone. Okay, why are him and his friend showing up in a taxi to a house fire? I mean, the fire department couldn't even get there for 8 hours. And he makes it sound like, oh well, it's too far gone. Let's just take something.
Yeah, I'm not buying Lonnie's story. I don't know what the truth is, but it's not what he said.
Yeah, and plus, I mean, if he actually admitted to cutting the phone lines, she gets that phone call, then the phone lines are cut, and then the fire happens. So he was there right around that time.
Right.
So then it makes you wonder if that was a distraction for the theft. And then, of course, whoever cut the phone lines probably used the ladder. That's why it wasn't, where it was supposed to be.
I think that's very possible.
Okay, so now, go ahead, Scott.
It's building up more and more to be more likely that it was not an act of God.
Yes. And, okay, so now the second part of the mystery. So now the fire is burning. Do you believe the children were taken out of the house by an unknown person?
I think that they probably were taken out by an unknown person, or they exited on their own and were quickly intercepted by an unknown person, because it's evident that they didn't die in the fire, in my opinion.
Interesting. What do you think, Scott?
I would agree with her. It doesn't seem like, well, we know that apparently no bodies were found within the remains, so they weren't left there, and it doesn't make sense that they would just vanish all of a sudden if they weren't taken by somebody.
So what do you guys think about when the hole was covered up 4 days? Do you think there's a chance that remains could be in there somewhere?
Maybe if they did a really poor job of searching in the first place. Now I know we're not dealing with the best professionals when it comes to this case, but how do you miss 4 sets of human remains?
Yes. And and see, I was always kind of, thinking more of the fire. I think this research of kind of, I'm a little bit more, I'm not 100% convinced, because I do think it would be hard to take 5 people out of the fire, but I also remember the 2 sons were told to go outside and take care of the animals before they went to bed. And the 3 little girls could have followed them out there. All 5 of the kids could have been outside at one time and could have been taken then.
That's true.
Yeah.
And because one thing that's surprising to me is that, no one really knows where the children were when the fire started. Even the older boys, they weren't even sure whether they were in their beds. And the mother, when she got up to check things, the door was unlocked, it says.
If they weren't taken before, I could see the fire being used as convenient cover-up.
Yeah.
But the initial search of the remnants of the fire, when you're dealing with the fire department that showed up that late to a fire, I'm not sure how they're going to be when searching either.
That's a good point. Then there's the whole beef liver rabbit hole with this case as well. There's a lot of very strange stuff that went on.
Yeah, and the mysterious WV video really makes the fire chief, doesn't show him in the best light. And when they said, well, why didn't you tell us you found this? He's like, well, I thought I did. That was his response. So as far as like the different theories, because do you guys believe that the children, who do you think would have taken them? Do you have any clear-cut opinion?
Honestly, I've thought about it, and I don't know. I think it's very strange that someone would abduct them, but I also don't think they were capable of thoroughly disappearing on their own. So I have to assume that if they didn't die in the fire, then there was at least one adult involved in their disappearance.
Yeah, and they talk about the black market. The only real evidence is the black market existed. But as far as the Fiorenzo Giannotullo, he kind of had the most motive, for lack of a better term, because for some reason he had a house insurance policy on their house, whether I guess maybe he owned it and George was renting it. He was upset that he didn't, get a policy on the children. He was upset about the anti-Mussolini remarks. They had already parted on bad terms when they worked together 2 years ago. So, the motive is kind of stacking up against him. And then
would you with all those children is what I wonder. That's a lot of kids to abduct, and then for them to never be heard again. It makes me think that maybe they unfortunately didn't live that long after the abduction, if an abduction did occur.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you guys thought the children were killed or, sent away.
I think the children being killed is the most likely scenario.
Yeah.
Because it's not like they were a bunch of, very small children who could forget their past life. A teenager is going to remember their family and their parents, and I assume try to reconnect with them.
Yeah, the oldest one was 14. Yeah, he would definitely remember.
He would definitely know who he was, at least.
Yeah. One of the theories that I still don't understand was that Jenny Sodder's brother, Frank Cipriani, took them. And they said the FBI got involved briefly because of that. And basically they think the children that lived with Frank were his actual children. And it's like, wouldn't Jenny know who her nieces and nephews were?
That's very confusing to me as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he lived in Cortez, so that's the sighting of these children in Cortez. Maybe someone saw Frank with kids, and oh, I bet you that's the Sodder children.
Right, and if they're cousins, they might look pretty similar as well. So.
Yeah, that's true. Do you guys think that actually was a picture of Lewis that was sent to them years later?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Not hopeful.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that look like other people, and
I would like to believe that it's him and that he was alive, but it seems unlikely to me.
Yeah, because one of the daughters was reportedly seen in a convent. I mean, there's always, people seeing people that aren't really there. But I do see where the children still thought, even up till they've all passed away now, they all thought that their siblings were all taken.
Yeah, if there's one thing I've learned from my work, it's that when there's a big thing like this that happens, a big tragedy or significant crime, a lot of people want to help, but they may be seeing, more what they want to see than what's actually there.
Yes, I believe that's the same with Lewis Sodder. The picture, someone thought it looked so much like him that they sent that picture to the Sodders.
Yeah, like for example, when the whole Gabby Petito case happened, I live and work nowhere near where that occurred, but the amount of, bizarre sightings of Brian Laundrie calls that we had to field in the most unlikely of places. People had the right place, but Brian Laundrie was never anywhere near us. So I think of that photo.
Yeah.
So we've kind of already went through, but so to wrap this up, you guys do think that the Sodder children were taken or removed from the house that night?
I do.
I think it's very possible because the fire, it didn't burn nearly hot or long enough to destroy their remains. And even if it did, even in a professional cremation, there are still some remains left. But with a fire like this, there would have been significant skeletal remains left over, at least children. So unless somebody got to the scene and removed and hid those, which I suppose is possible, I don't think the kids died in the fire.
Yeah.
The only other thing I have to add to that is I'm not familiar with how thorough searches were in the 40s of house fires.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point.
I'm not sure where the arson investigation as a field was in the 40s. I wish I knew, but there's that shadow of doubt that they could have missed something.
You're right. There is a lot of incompetence that happened with this case.
Yeah, and had George not had the hole filled, we probably wouldn't even be talking about this case because they could have thoroughly searched and found bones if there were any to find.
And with a normal house fire, there should have been bones.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, there were small children, but there were 5 of them, so. And they're checking right away after it's done.
There are, and fires, even with modern firefighting, if you're going through and you're searching to see if there was anybody deceased from the fire, I mean, you could have been, while you're fighting the fire, if it's an active fire, you could be 3 feet away from somebody and not see anything. But after the fact, you're going to spend a significant amount of time sifting through the remains and the rubble and ashes.
Yeah.
And you find some horrifying scenes still.
That reminds me of Ashley Freeman and Laura Bible. Didn't they check thoroughly? And then eventually they found like the parents in the fire?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a very long process, and it doesn't seem to me like this department gave their full effort into trying to make sure they had all of that done.
Yeah, and you wonder how little training they even had in 1945 to be in that position.
That's a really good point.
Because nowadays, I think we would have absolutely, they would do DNA testing even on any kind of remains.
I mean, fire investigation and arson investigation has come so far in the past few decades even that, I mean, we went from it being kind of a generalized off to the side thing and people would just search around, but now they're actually chemically checking and making sure that they can test for accelerants, which wasn't likely back then. And there's so much fire science behind an arson investigation today. Yeah. That's not something that you leave to your standard normal frontline firefighter.
Yeah, that's true. And it's like the Mary Elizabeth Eden that I've written about. It was a fire on Christmas Eve. It was a one-room schoolhouse. It was an inferno. And where did she go? Well, she's probably in the remains. They just never found them.
I would hate to think that all these kids were there in the house the whole time and nobody bothered to do a halfway thorough job checking. But considering that they took 7 hours to get to the scene in the first place and the whole beef liver incident, maybe I'm overestimating their thoroughness.
Yeah, and the two older brothers yelled for everyone to get out, but and they think maybe they heard the boys respond, but of course it was such chaos. It's just crazy that we don't even know where these 5 children were when the fire started. Nobody can say, oh, well, yeah, they were in bed.
That is strange.
And I think it would be really hard to get them out of the house. Like I said, Marion was sleeping right by the door. I think for some reason they all went outside if they were taken.
Yeah.
I can see the children tagging along with the older ones. Kids never bed.
Yes.
Or maybe the boys never came back in, so they went out to check.
That's possible too.
And there was the sighting where the mother said that this guy would park his car and watch every day. And of course, we would all be alerted nowadays, but oh, well, it's on public property. It's not my business. But maybe he knew the schedule.
I think. It's very weird, that guy parking and watching.
Yes, and I'm curious if Christmas Eve was any kind of a significant, as to why it happened then.
When you talk about taking somebody and them not showing up, one of the first things my mind always jumps to is some sort of extortion event also.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that had anything to play in it also, and that's why we haven't ever heard from them since.
Yeah, and that Janatulo, back then, Mussolini, anti-Mussolini, that would have been enough right then. Well, I'll get back, I'll get you back. Maybe he was hoping the entire family would have been wiped out.
It's very possible. There's a lot of different ways for motive to be incorporated.
Yeah, and there's also the possibility that Lonnie Johnson, maybe he was working for Janatulo.
That's possible.
And they said that his brother was actually on the coroner's jury that ruled the fire accidental. So
I read that. They did a very poor job with that, selecting that jury, to say the least.
Yeah, and they said the Sodder said that Janatulo was not even questioned about the fire because of his standing in the community.
Ugh.
But, okay, well, so we all kind of, I think I'm a little bit more towards maybe in the fire, but I appreciate you guys' opinion because you have a lot more probably knowledge about how long it would take to burn remains up. And I don't disagree with anything that you said. That's why it's such a mystery, because it's like, well, you could kind of make a little bit of a case, for either one.
Right. This could just be decades worth of incompetence just compounding.
Yeah.
Really could.
And it's crazy how many of these cases that nowadays they would not happen. Everything would have been figured out.
That's true. I don't think this would be a mystery if it happened nowadays. Definitely not.
Yeah.
No.
Well, thank you, Scott and Leah, for the discussion. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. Please, everyone, check out their podcast if you are not already listening to it. It's Last Seen Alive, once again. Take care, you guys, and best of luck in the future on your podcast.
Thanks for having us, Heather. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
It was a lot of fun. Congratulations on starting your podcast, and I hope to see many more episodes in the future.
Well, thank you. Now time for my thoughts on this case. I do believe that it is incredible that there were no remains to speak of from 5 bodies after a fire that only seemed to burn for a short period of time. But we have to remember that just because the remains were not found doesn't mean they weren't on site. I am not 100% convinced either, but am leaning towards my belief that they perished in the fire. It seems less likely, in my opinion, that people would enter during a house fire or shortly before and take 5 children out, leaving the rest and not alerting the other 6 people in the home. Also remember that the Sodder's daughter Marion was sleeping near the front door when the fire started. It would be difficult to get that many people, the children and at least one abductor, to get past her without her waking up. However, if Louis and Maurice were outside tending to the animals, perhaps the 3 younger children followed them out there. That would certainly make them more vulnerable if someone was outside waiting and probably wouldn't have alerted the others who were sleeping inside. I do think the picture sent to Jenny Sodder, reported to be Louis, does look like him, but most of us have seen people that look so much like someone we know, it's startling. I think that is what happened here. As puzzling as no human remains being found are, I do want to mention a few things that might help explain that. There is a report that George Sodder did store coal in his basement. If true, that would have made the fire burn hotter, and remember, it was left to burn or smolder all night. I also found a mention in an online article that, according to police reports, George Sodder used his basement as a makeshift garage, which he later denied. They indicated he kept motors down there, as well as 55-gallon drums of gas, which would of course intensify the heat of the fire. If both of these statements are correct, and the Sodder basement contained coal as well as gasoline, it would make sense that the house was leveled after only 45 minutes of burning. I read a statement in an article about the case from the Times WV that I thought was a valid opinion. When the Sodders covered the embers with dirt, they inadvertently created an oven that would advance the cremation process. I do tend to think the house fire could be arson. The phone lines being cut, the theft possibly during the fire, the ladder removed, the thud on the roof shortly before the fire started could all point to the fire being deliberate. As to why, if it was arson, that is most certainly one thing we will never know due to the passage of time. It could be anything from retaliation for anti-Mussolini remarks, to a distraction while a theft was taking place, to a former boss seeking revenge and wanting to collect on an insurance claim, or it could be something else that has never been brought to light. It's still amazing that 78 years later, there are still nothing but questions in this case. No real clues or possible credible matches for the Sodder children have ever surfaced, so it appears that this case will forever remain a mystery. The Sodder children technically are still missing persons because it is unknown what happened to them after the fire. Were they abducted with the ruse of taking them to safety? Were they kidnapped as retaliation against the parents for George's anti-Mussolini remarks, problems with the former boss, or another unknown problem? Were they killed after they were abducted? Or did they tragically die Christmas Eve night, their remains completely incinerated due to the house fire and worsened by the possible burning of gas and coal in the basement? One thing is known, though. That night, George and Jenny did lose their children in whatever fashion and were never reunited with them. Sadly, their grief over losing children didn't end in 1945. I found a death certificate for a Michael Sodder who was born to George and Jenny just a few days after the 5-year anniversary of the house fire. He lived only 1 day, so the Sodders were left to mourn yet another child, all the while continuing to search tirelessly for answers for their other 5 lost children. This case of several human beings literally vanishing in a fire with no answers is so unsettling and is a mystery that has stood the test of time. The Sodders were in a perpetual state of not knowing whether to search for their children or to grieve for them, but in the end they would wind up doing both. What makes it even more sad is that this would happen right at Christmas, which definitely makes this a nightmare Noel. That concludes our podcast on the Sodder children. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find my podcast, Lost and Found Podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. I try to have a new podcast posted every 2 weeks. And as always, you can find all of my articles as well as links to my latest podcasts on my website at Lost and Found Blogs. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.